Hello, today we're going to be making a diorama featuring a ruined stone wall with a central figure in front of it. Let's get right into it. The central figure will be this rogue Hobbies Goblin knight, while we'll make the stone wall from scratch. A little planning goes a long way when making a diorama. We don't have to come up with every detail now, but it helps to know what all the core elements will be, and how they will be laid out in relation to each other. To make the base for the diorama, we're going to craft a frame out of styrene. First, we'll measure and cut strips out of styrene with a sharp hobby knife, as well as some triangles to make brackets for reinforcement. I'm using the chopper here, but you could get the same result with a protractor, a sharp knife, and some patience. Thin plastic cement is used to join the pieces together. Once our frame is dry, we're going to cut out a piece of XPS foam to fill the middle with. This doesn't have to be exact, as we're going to fill any gaps later. The foam itself is glued into place using PVA glue. Cheap polyfiller is used to fill any gaps and help hold the foam more securely. We're going to make the ruined walls using more insulation foam offcuts. I don't have any specific measurements in mind, so I'm holding pieces in place to get a rough idea of how big each piece will need to be. At first this foam seemed to be a good choice, but once I started using it I wasn't happy with how well the foam was taking texture. It kept slowly re-expanding back into the lines I was carving, and I was worried about this happening after painting. So I went back and cut out the shapes again from the purple XPS foam, which I don't have as much of, but which I at least knew would be stable after carving. The sheets of purple foam are thinner, so I had to cut out each shape twice. After confirming that the pieces fit within the frame of the diorama, I used a pencil to mark some guidelines, then carved a rough stonework pattern into them. I'm aiming for this to look like coarse rubble masonry, like I used to see on the kinds of castles I grew up around. You can of course go for a different style if you want. My only recommendation is to get plenty of reference photos. With the patterns etched in, I went back with the pencil to round out some of the sharp corners, to make the stones look more weathered. With both large faces textured, I glued the two sides together with PVA glue. Cocktail sticks were cut up and used to reinforce the pieces, so they didn't slide around while drying. I then used the pencil again to add more stonework patterns along the narrow sides. I tried to make this pattern cross over the join line at several points, to make it look more like a single wall and not two separate layers that have been stuck together. Once we've got our patterns carved, we need to add some texture. This is easy to do using a rock and some scrunched up aluminium foil. It looks good at this stage, but I still want to add a bit more variation to the stonework, so we're going to use a metal sculpting tool to press some of the bricks inwards slightly and remove squarish chunks of the foam. This really helps sell the impression of time and damage affecting these old stones. We can glue the two pieces together using PVA glue and cocktail sticks as before. A little milliput is used to fill any gaps along the join and help blend the two pieces together. The wall is then secured to the base deliberately at a slight angle to make it look more natural within a completed scene. Once all of the glue is dry, we're going to seal the wall using some watered down PVA. This helps to fill some of the pores in the foam, as well as protect it from any harsher substances we might be using later. To make the base of the ground forms, we're going to use a fibre plaster mix. This is stirred with water until it's roughly the consistency of tuna mayo, then applied over the surface of the diorama. After about 10 minutes it started to cure a little, and a wet finger can be used to smooth out any rougher surfaces before it fully dries. We'll put down a quick layer of brown acrylic paint, but we're going to be covering all of this using a soil mix later. For the stone wall we're going to do an all over base coat using a slight bluish grey, making sure to work the brush into all of the recesses. This is deliberately applied quite thickly to cover any remaining texture from the foam itself. Once the first layer has dried, we're going to dry brush a slightly more neutral, lighter grey over much of the surface, still leaving the blue undertone showing through in places. To give the impression of different minerals within the stones, we're going to wash a couple of them with thin Reichland flesh shade, a kind of reddish brown wash. A cold green is applied in recesses where water might gather, to start giving the impression of moss and plant growth. To add some shading to the wall and bring out the texture we applied earlier, we're going to do an all-over oil wash. A mix of black and brown oil paint is thinned heavily and applied all over the wall, before the excess is removed with a paper towel. Next, we want to add some lichen to the stone walls. This is easy to do with some paint, an old brush, and a toothpick. Just pick the colours that you want, in this case ogre camo and iron rack skin, and fleck it over the model like so. This is deliberately done in an uneven and patchy way, so that we end up with some areas where the lichen is growing more than others. To really cement that overgrown feeling, we're going to add some paper plants from Earthworks Scenics. These are by far and away the best paper plants I've used personally, and the website has really useful guides with each plant on the kind of environment it would naturally be found in. First you want to cut them out of the sheet, and then use a bit of paint on a sponge to add some variety to the leaves. A tiny dab of PVA glue is used to glue the leaves together. The last touch is to add some small bends and kinks in the leaves to make them look more natural. For this plant I found it easier to do with my hands rather than the tweezers, but you might find otherwise. A little dab of PVA glue is used to attach the plants in place, and any final adjustments to the leaves and positioning can be made with tweezers. I added one more plant for good measure before finishing the wall with some clump foliage for moss. Now onto the main figure of our diorama. I primed it in grey and temporarily glued it to a base for easy handling while painting. We're going for a classic Goblin green colour for the skin, so we're going to base coat it with Vallejo's Scorpy green. I typically tend towards more muted, earthy tones in my painting, but for this piece I wanted to try using brighter, more saturated colours. I used two different tones of brown for the cloth, in this case Rhinox hide and Thondia brown, to give the cloth a slightly patchwork appearance. The foot wraps and rope were picked out in a warm bone colour. Baneblade brown was used for wooden components such as the mace shaft. I wanted the teeth to stand out a little, so we're going to paint them in a slightly paler bone colour than the other bone elements of the model. To complement the bright green of the goblin, we're going to paint the little wizard frog in a warm red hue, inspired by a tomato frog. Flashgit's yellow is used for the feather and top of the frog's hat. The delightful wizard's hat is painted with Araman blue. We'll paint the mushrooms with a slightly colder hue of red than the frog to keep the two distinct from each other. For raised areas of the skin, as well as the insides of the ears, we're going to mix a little bile green into our Scorpy green base coat. By using another solid colour instead of white to change the hue of our base coat, we avoid desaturating it and keep the colours nice and vibrant. To base coat the metallic areas, we're going to use Vallejo's natural steel. A thin black wash was then applied over all of the model. I'm still not sure if this wash was a good idea or not. On a larger scale model like this one, there are more flat surfaces where the wash can pool in ways that you don't want it to, so it might have been better to do the shading manually instead. If you've got any thoughts on this though, let me know, I'd be interested to hear them. The skin tone was re-established with the same mix of bile green and Scorpy green, applied as a glaze on the areas that would receive more light. A second glaze is then done with more bile green mixed in. For the leather and cloth areas, we're going to mix a little sand colour into the browns we used previously. This will give a nice warm hue to the highlights. The rest of the base coats will be re-established using the original colour. We're now going to start punching up the brightness on our next series of highlights. To really make the details and colours pop, Citadel's Baharoth blue was mixed into Araman blue for the frog's wizard hat, adding a little more to each glaze until we're happy. A light cream colour, in this case Ushabti bone, is used for the first highlight on the ropes and bone sections. Some wraithbone is mixed in for the highlights on the most raised sections, with pure wraithbone being used on the teeth and horns. Next, bright white is applied to the eyes and spots on the mushrooms, for that classic fly amanita appearance. At this point I felt that the highlights on the leather weren't visible enough, so I made a second highlight with more sand colour mixed in. Our little froggy friend needs another layer or two to help them stand out, so we're going to mix some orange into the red used for the base coat, and carefully highlight its spots and raised areas. The metallics are last to be highlighted. First, we'll re-establish the base colour with Vallejo's natural steel, then apply glazes of natural steel with a little silver mixed in, onto the areas that would most catch the light. A little mud is dry brushed onto the lower parts of the goblin. It's been traipsing around outside after all, and we want it to blend nicely into our diorama when we add the soils and dirt later. The metallics look good, but to finish the rest of the goblin, we're going to apply a matte varnish. This will make all of our highlights and glazes more visible, and the colours will seem that little bit brighter. It'll also get rid of that slight plasticky satin finish that many acrylic paints have, and make our figure look less like a model and more like an actual thing. Finally, a layer of gloss varnish is applied to the eyes to bring them to life. Super glue is used to attach our figure to the diorama. They're a little off-centre, again deliberately to make this look less like something planned and more like a snapshot from a natural scene. Now onto one of my favourite bits, soil texturing. To make our soil, we're going to start out with some actual garden topsoil. This is spread onto a tray and left on a windowsill until it's dry. Next we'll put it through a sieve to break up the larger chunks and filter out any bits that we don't want. This soil came from a bag of garden soil I brought a while ago, and occasionally there are little bits of plastic or ceramic that we don't want in our diorama. We do still want some of the texture and small stones though, so after we've sieved out most of the finer soil, we'll use a spoon to collect some of the chunkier bits and mix them back in. Make sure you wear a mask for this next bit. Some brown tile grout, roughly equal to the soil in volume, is added. This will add some finer texture that's appropriate for soil at smaller scales, but more importantly will act as a binder to hold everything together when we add moisture. Next, some dried silver birch seeds make wonderful leaf litter. You can buy these in bulk and dry them out yourself if you want to, but personally I just buy them from a model store. We're going to add some of the dark green foam flock we used for moss earlier. This is a bit of an experiment, but I'm hoping it will look like little pieces of vegetation growing in the soil. Lastly, coconut fibres are excellent for making vines and roots. Just snip off a few strands and stir them in. Mix it thoroughly, and that's our soil mix done. To apply the soil mix, we're going to take an old brush and put a thin layer of PVA glue over all of the areas we want the soil to stick to. We'll use a small sieve to apply the initial layer of our soil mix. We want to get a nice all-over coating of the fine soil and grout, before tipping the rest over for all of that texture and detail. Before we seal the soil in place, we're going to brush the excess off the areas around the feet that we don't want too much soil to stick to. We'll clean the rest off the walls and higher up areas later, but for now we're focusing on areas that are at risk of getting sealant on by accident. To seal everything, we're going to make a 1-to-1 mix of matte Mod Podge and water. You can also use PVA glue, but the Mod Podge dries faster and with less of a glossy finish. To apply it to the diorama, use a pipette to first dampen the area with isopropyl alcohol. This will break the surface tension of the thin Mod Podge when you apply it, so it doesn't form beads of glue on the surface, and will help draw it down through the soil and grout mix. Leave it to dry, preferably overnight, and then apply a second layer of IPA and thin Mod Podge. This will make your soil mix nice and durable. Here we can see the finished soil texture. The glue pulled a little thick in some areas, so isn't as matte as I'd normally like it, but in this case the slightly damp look suits the environment we're trying to capture perfectly. A dry brush or air duster can then be used to remove any soil that got into places we don't want it, such as higher up on the walls in Goblin. We're almost finished now, but I think we want a couple of extra plants. Back to the Earthworks Scenics paper plant set, we're going to make one Western Fern and one Hard Fern. As before, we carefully cut the leaves out of the paper and use a sponge to apply 2 slightly different shades of green to them on both sides. To get the height on the Western Fern, I found it helped to use something to prop up the leaves while they dried. In this case, I used 2 pipettes from earlier, but you could use a brush or anything else you have laying around. The hard fern could be assembled without any extra supports though, and it was easy enough to bend the leaves into shape once they'd dried. I love how fine the detail on these plants is. You have to be gentle when handling them, so I'm not sure I'd recommend them for beginners, but if you've got the practice and the patience, then the final result is absolutely worth it. The sides of the base are given a quick sand with an emery board to remove any dirt or gunk that's stuck to them. Lastly, a coat of black paint is applied around the base, and we can call our diorama finished. I'm really happy with this diorama. It was fun combining the more colourful style of the Goblin with the more naturalistic style of the ruined walls behind it. If you're wanting to have a go at making dioramas of your own, there's one key suggestion I'd make. Come up with your concept, your idea, whatever it is you want to make, and then make it just a little bit smaller. When we're starting out on a new project, it can be easy to get caught up in the excitement and commit ourselves to something very big. Big dioramas are great, they can be loads of fun to make, but they can also be very easy to burn ourselves out on and lose motivation over time. If you've not made many things like this before, my advice would be to start small and work your way up to those bigger projects. I hope you've enjoyed this video though. Let me know what you enjoyed or if you learned anything new from it. Until next time, I've been Mark, and I hope you have a wonderful day.